I'm Mike Toutonghi, and I actually started at Microsoft December 7th, 1992. A day that could be infamous, but for me, it's an auspicious day. And I started as an SDE in the Windows kernel group. I was quickly promoted to be lead developer in the Windows kernel group. It was an amazing time from December 7th, 1992 to 2003, which was, I think, in January when I left the first time. And I left, then just wasn't a plan when I left, but I ended up building a social network, and Microsoft ended up buying that social network back in 2007. And so I came back to Microsoft to actually work on as a technical fellow on the advertising platform. I worked on that for a few years. I moved to a project called Midori, an internal operating system project. And then the last time I left Microsoft was actually in 2011. Right now, I'm lead developer on worldwide unlimited scale financial network, a cryptocurrency network. I was born and grew up on Capitol Hill in Seattle. And, we were not well off, the family. And yet we figured out a way to make things work. As I was growing up, I was actually probably a lot of trouble. So I was always into something. I loved science. I may have made things that exploded when I was younger. I may have made things that made a lot of, smoke when I was younger and things like that. But it was really the science. It was really it was chemistry or physics or these things that I was really excited about. And our neighbor had a Commodore PET computer. And that was the most amazing device that I had ever seen, because it could play games, but in order to play the games, you had to take a book and type in the games. And it looked kind of obvious what I was typing in. It looked like, that doesn't look so hard. I think rather than typing in these games that other people made in the book, I should make some of my own. When I decided to make technology my career was after I had done a lot of other things and really got to the point where I didn't feel that my mind was challenged as much as it needed to be. And I loved science. And so because I had that experience with learning BASIC, some years before, and I was now doing work that was not really challenging my mind at all, I decided that I was going to make a software program and sell it to the world. I started using IBM PCs, and I started using computers that this company that I got connected to was using. They were a systems integrator. And I was using their computers to do my schoolwork. And then they started having problems in their company. So they were basically going to need to close because they weren't making enough sales of computers around Seattle. And I said, I've been in sales before. Why don't you just let me sell computers for you? You don't have to pay me anything. Just pay some commission for me. I'll help you guys, sell computers, and you can keep your company alive. And then I can continue to use your company, your computers to do my schoolwork. And so they said, okay. So we started actually selling computers, and I got this idea that I wanted to do computer-aided design workstations. And so I started just building computer-aided design workstations in their company and started selling them to companies around Seattle. I ended up being the person who would demo these computer-aided design workstations. And so the colleges had this head-to-head design contest, with people from IBM, people from CalComp, people from Digital Equipment, and me. And, self-taught, figured out how all this stuff works. And we beat the other companies hands down. All of the community colleges bought computers from us. And when we had to deliver them, my technical team was kind of MIA. And so I ended up personally going around and installing computers in these different, and teaching the professors how to use the computer, and I realized at the time, this was when it might seem that up until that point I was deciding to go into computer. No. At this time, when I was doing that, I realized I don't want to be in sales. I never want to sell something that someone else has to deliver, because I don't know for sure that they will, So I want to be the guy who makes the software, and other people can go and sell the software. And so I started building software. And so a company down in California recruited me to be in charge of R&D for their software department. And then another company further south in California recruited me to run their engineering department. And then 1992. And that's when I ended up coming and talking to Brad Silverberg and a bunch of people in the Windows 95 group, and realized that this feels like home and I want to come here. Up until that time, I had just forged my own way, and I wasn't hiring people or, I was just building and kind of forging my own way. And here I came to this group, and people were enthused, and they were smart, and they were, building software that I thought, okay, well, I could fit right in and I could help here. The recruiter at the time at Microsoft, it was kind of a crazy thing, but I guess that they did that at the time. Once I agreed, and we had negotiated everything, and I agreed that I was coming to Microsoft, they sent me kind of the welcome gift. I don't know what they send out these days, but it was a big salmon, a big, fresh, smelly salmon, and I thought that's so cool. I started at Microsoft back in 1992, and I started in development on the Windows kernel group, and quickly was made development lead for Windows kernel, and worked on that until we shipped. People don't really think about kernel as being something people care about. It just has to work. But when I started on Windows 95 in 1992, Windows 95 did not have this concept called threads. So let me just quickly explain what threads are. It's if you've got an application, the application may want to show you a document, may want to let you edit that document, may want to be printing or doing other things in the background while you're editing. It may want to do a number of different things, okay? Having threads lets the app do multiple things at once, kind of like you would expect your computer can, But when I started, Windows 95 was not going to be able to do that. And so that was actually one of the first things I worked on and finished in Windows 95, was this ability for apps to do multiple things at the same time. So what that did is it made much easier compatibility for Office 95, which was really important to have Windows 95 and Office 95 kind of platform apps. It made it much easier for Office 95 to be the same program running on Windows, running on, at the time, Windows NT. So running on Windows 95, running on Windows NT, which were completely different operating systems, but still be an advanced app. And so that was one thing that really changed the way that people relate to their computers. They don't think about it, but they would think about it if it didn't have threads. The other thing, we were 2 months away from shipping, like really getting the whole operating system out the door, the golden disks. We had golden disks back then, and the time slicer, which was, it predated me, was unable to do even a screensaver while other things were happening in the background without the screensaver, like stop and then restart again and stop. And I looked through everything and I said, the only way that I know that we could fix this is we have to rewrite the time slicer, like the low-level scheduler that will interrupt threads of execution, and it has to be rewritten. I actually I left and went home for 2 weeks. I just worked at home, like papers all over the place, figuring out how to do all these different things, printouts, and I worked straight for, not a whole lot of sleep and everything, 2 weeks, and rewrote it. And it worked as expected. So you asked the question, what was different in Windows 95 that really made that difference? And here's what I believe. It's really all about the user experience, not about kernel, really. Kernel those two things would have been in the way of a great user experience. Carl Stork, Brad Silverberg, David Cole, three of the best leaders that I had experienced up to that point, and they led these changes. They did. They led the changes culturally in the group to make these things happen. They led the changes by insisting on, what matters all the time. We had this concept of Brad's mom. Everything had to be usable by Brad's mom. Windows 95 was so much easier than any Windows 3.1, 3.1.1 at the time. And it was reviewed head-to-head against Apple, and many people thought it was better. I just remember Brad Silverberg getting up and talking about the internet. And we had been so heads down on Windows 95. Some of us had been used it a little bit, but we really hadn't put a lot of attention and thought because we were so focused on releasing Windows 95. And so it was basically kind of a wake-up call, an intentional wake-up call for everyone in the group. We're going to now be the internet division. So we were all supposed to go off and kind of figure out what we should do and then, work those ideas up through the management chain, and then we would know what to do. And then I started the .NET platform group. The thing people were using back then in Microsoft, which was called COM, wasn't good enough anymore. A lot of people did not like that. And we needed something better. We needed a new platform that was made for the internet because it had security built in. It had type safety built in. And I had to present, why could we do this thing that I believed we needed to do? The turning point for the .NET platform group was an event that we called BOLT, Beachside Offsite on Lightning Technology, which we held as an open company event. And we invited groups from all around the company to really try and understand what it was we were building. We presented all these different things, hopefully answered a bunch of questions. And that was probably 2 years into the project. And that's when we went from really being not well understood and not really supported and kind of like people didn't like what we were doing because it was a threat to, we should all be thinking about this as a future thing. It basically gave Microsoft a modern development platform. So really what .NET did is it created this consistent platform from, the biggest servers to the smallest devices as a thing that you could target. Now it's in Azure and it's, kind of across all of Microsoft's products and platforms. And it really just had more to do with security, more modern execution environments and operating systems, and a easier to use, more consistent, more modern development platform, which was really important at the time. I'm proud of, obviously, being a founder on .NET, something I will be proud of till the day I die. I turned that group over to David Treadwell at the time. And then I was actually thinking about retiring. Steve Ballmer told me, you can take a sabbatical as long as you want. If you meet with me once a month for lunch, let me know what you're up to. And if it's time for you to separate from the company, then you can. And if you want to come back, then we can talk about it. 2 or 3 months later, I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Whether it's here or myself, you know, it was when TiVo was taking off, and I saw TiVo as a PC in people's living room. And that was, you know, I wanted to make what was more of a computer, but usable in a way with a remote control and easy for people to use. And I said, this is what I want to make. He said, well, I think you could do much better at Microsoft than on your own with that. So why don't we park you under Craig Mundy, you figure it out, and then, you know, start that effort here. And then I came back and was the promoted to vice president, and then launched the eHome division. And I did that until 2003, and I left the company. Around 2007, Microsoft bought Web5s, and I came back. And one of the reasons was to help integrate all of the platforms that Microsoft had in advertising. So Midori, this was the last thing that I worked on before then leaving Microsoft and not coming back. Midori was this concept of, you know, so all the operating systems that we use today were kind of conceived of in the 70s. That's actually still true. The models and everything else, you know. And Midori was this effort to say, well, hardware is much different than it was then. Things have evolved in ways that, you know, were different than everybody maybe expected exactly. And so if we were going to make an operating system from scratch today, what would it be? And that was Midori. The culture that I experienced at Microsoft always felt like we were like a family, but I mean in the best sense, like not people have to work so hard because you're a family, you know, it's really just surrounded by many different kinds of people, but great people, you know, and enthusiastic people who cared about others, who cared about what we were doing. That kind of came out in like everything that we did. Before coming to Microsoft, I had worked around people, I'd worked in software, but it was that some feeling of really, really brilliant people all trying to create something that they believed in. That to me was what was just amazing about Microsoft.